I want you to visualize a specific scene. You are inside the Palace of Ukraine. It's the single largest concert hall in Kiev. It's cavernous. There are over 3,000 people sitting there in the semi-darkness. And standing on stage, illuminated by a spotlight that feels a little too bright given the circumstances, is a man with a microphone. His name is Anton Timoshenko.
Who is right now probably one of the biggest names in Ukrainian stand-up, a huge star.
Right. And he decides to open his set with a topic that, in London or New York or Berlin would probably trigger a mass walkout, or at least a collective panic attack. He starts riffing on the very active, very real threat of a tactical nuclear strike by the Russian Federation.
Yeah, that's not exactly lighthearted opening material. It's the standard geopolitical nightmare scenario. The thing that keeps Pentagon officials up at night is now an opening bit for a comedy special.
Exactly. But here is where the logic, or at least the logic of a peacetime mind, it just breaks down completely. He asks the crowd, who here is actually afraid of a nuclear strike?
And I assume the room just goes dead silent. I mean, who wouldn't be?
Not quite. A few people clap, maybe 10% of the room. Just a smattering of applause for the apocalypse. And Timoshenko, he looks at them and says, you are the minority. And then he explains why the other 90%, the 3,000 people sitting in silence, aren't clapping.
Okay, I'm listening.
It isn't because they are brave. It isn't because they are these stoic, unconquerable warriors of legend that you read about.
Let me guess. It's something mundane. Bureaucratic.
It is entirely bureaucratic. He argues that if the nuclear strike happens, nobody has to go to work the next day. It's the ultimate resignation. The logic being, if the world ends, at least the inbox finally clears itself.
That is efficiently grim. It's the end of history as a valid excuse for missing a Zoom call. Just a complete abdication of responsibility in the face of annihilation.
It gets even darker. Timoshenko proposes a kind of schedule optimization to the crowd. He says it would be better if the nuclear strike happened right before Easter. He argues that way we can combine the holidays. You get the radioactive fallout days off, plus the religious holiday, a nice long weekend at the end of the world. And the audience, they are absolutely losing their minds. They are roaring with laughter.
And see, that reaction is exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We have a stack of reports here from Euromaidan Press, The Village Ukraine, The Guardian, Lee Room, and United 24 Media, and we are dissecting the stand-up comedy scene in Ukraine during the full-scale invasion. But we need to be very, very clear about the mission here.
Dude.
This is not a heartwarming story. We are absolutely not doing a morning show segment on resilience or the indomitable human spirit. That narrative is cheap, and frankly, it's insulting to the reality on the ground. This is a deep dive into how humor is being weaponized, monetized, and used as a, physiological crutch, because the only alternative is a collective psychotic break.
As that one headline from The Guardian put it, and it stuck with me, war is very funny for the first couple of years. Then it becomes not so funny.
Right. And we are in that strange, funny, but not funny period. So today we're going to look at the biology of why people laugh during air raids, the strange economics of premium versus budget deaths, and why artificial intelligence is just utterly incapable of writing a war joke.
Plus the story of a comedian's mother's ashes and a 152mm howitzer, which I still can't quite believe is real, even though I'm looking at the photos right here in the source material.
Oh, it's real. And it's probably the most honest, most absurd moment in the whole stack. But let's stick with that opening moment at the Palace of Ukraine for a second, because it really does set the tonal baseline for everything we're going to discuss.
Okay.
So you have a comedian, Timoshenko, standing there. Let's say mid-joke, the sirens go off.
The air raid alerts, it happens all the time.
Right. And the official government advice, the frantic push notifications you get from the state emergency service, they all say to seek shelter immediately, go to the bunker, go to the metro station.
Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Just survive. Basic protocol.
So Timoshenko does a bit of crowd work during these moments. He asks these audience of 3,457 people, so who actually goes to the shelters? And how many people do you think clap?
Well, based on the nuclear joke, I'm guessing not many. Maybe a few hundred.
70?
70 out of nearly 3,500 people. That's a rounding error.
It is. And his response isn't to scold them. He doesn't give them a lecture on safety protocols. He calls them Kiev nonconformists.
A badge of honor for fatalism.
And then he says, I'm actually grateful to you. I do stand-up comedy. I constantly need to write new jokes so I don't repeat the old ones. But now I realize I don't need to write new jokes. And here's the punchline. The audience will rotate.
The audience will rotate. Wow. That is That is just brutally cynical. He's essentially saying his fan base is disposable because they're all going to die anyway.
The full punchline was, "Woohoo, we'll die!" And the crowd loves it. They applaud that line.
It feels like there's been a fundamental shift here from just coping with the situation to something else, something like just fully accepting the complete and utter absurdity of it. I mean, one of the bits from the source material that really stuck with me was about the sirens themselves. You know, the loud, wailing alerts from the state emergency service.
The ones designed to induce immediate, high-pitched alertness and panic. Yeah.
Tymoshenko jokes that he misses them. He says that sound, that screaming alert, it gave him a heart attack, sure, but he follows that up by saying it was a spark of life. He calls it an all-Ukrainian heart attack day.
A spark of life.
Yes, a unifying moment where everyone in the country wakes up screaming together. A shared national trauma that he's framed as like a morning coffee.
It is a profoundly dark observation, but it's actually rooted in physiology. It's not just a clever line. We have a source here, Alexander Avdiev. He's a psychiatrist and a CBT therapist who breaks this down in a very clinical way. He strips away all the sentimentality. He argues that what you're seeing isn't bravery. It isn't some noble defiance in the face of tyranny. It is biology, pure and simple.
How so? What does he mean by that?
It comes down to your nervous system. You have two main parts: the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic system is what ramps you up. It's your fight or flight response. It's the adrenaline, the panic, the cortisol dump. That's what the siren does. It's an emergency switch.
Right, it puts your body on high alert.
Exactly. But you cannot live in that state indefinitely. The human organism just isn't built for it. You stay in that state for too long and you get ulcers, heart failure, cognitive collapse. Your body literally starts to eat itself.
So the laughter is, what, the brake pedal, the off switch?
Precisely. Laughter, a deep belly laugh, physically stimulates the diaphragm. That physical action activates the vagus nerve, which is a primary component of the parasympathetic system, and that is your rest and digest system. It's the brake. It calms the organism down. Avdiev calls it a mental holiday.
A mental holiday.
Your brain cannot sustain high alert anxiety forever without braking. So it demands a release. They aren't laughing because the concept of a rotating audience is objectively funny in a traditional sense. They're laughing because their biology demands a reset from the terror.
It's a physiological release valve, a survival mechanism that just happens to look like entertainment. But Avdiev also mentioned something crucial about context. He calls it the context rule.
Yes, and this is so important. This is why war comedy is so incredibly insular and almost impossible to export successfully.
He gives this specific example of the two walls rule. I think most people following the news from Ukraine know this one. It's the safety advice that you should hide in a room with no windows, like a corridor or a bathroom, during a raid. The two walls are supposed to protect you from shrapnel and glass.
Right. It's standard, grimly practical, urban warfare survival advice.
So if you are in Kyiv and you crack a joke about hiding in the bathtub with your dog and your laptop, trying to get some work done, it's hilarious. It's a shared, specific, terrifying reality that everyone in the room understands viscerally. But Avdiev says if a refugee who is now living in, say, a luxury apartment in Portugal tells the same joke to an audience there, it falls completely flat. Silence.
Because the danger is removed, the humor is exclusive to the trauma. If you aren't currently at risk of being blown up, you don't earn the right to the punchline. It's a club, and the price of admission is mortal peril.
It creates this incredibly sharp divide between the inside and the outside, and it seems that divide extends even to the weapons themselves. This was the part of the source material that I found fascinating and honestly deeply disturbing.
The Consumer Report on munitions?
Yeah, the way the comedians are categorizing the specific weapons used to kill them, it is almost like a Yelp review for their own potential demise.
It's the economics of mortality. Tymoshenko has this whole extended bit about the hierarchy of death. He compares a potential nuclear strike to an attack by an Iranian Shahed drone.
Right, and the nuclear strike is the premium package, is the deluxe option.
It is the rich death. He says a nuclear bomb going off in the center of Kyiv would be cool. He literally uses that word. He says it has that big Hollywood sound, baba. It's an Oppenheimer moment. It has cinematic weight. If you die that way, you're part of history. You're a footnote in a major geopolitical event.
And then there's a Shahed drone.
The poor death. The budget option.
He describes the sound of it as like an old struggling moped engine or a lawnmower in the sky.
And that's the real insult. It's not just that you're dying, it's that you're being killed by cheap, mass-produced, almost pathetic technology. Timoshenko's punchline is, "It feels like you ordered your death from AliExpress and you chose the cheapest shipping."
And this is your Antoha. That's what he calls himself. He's imagining his own obituary, and the cause of death is a budget moped drone from Iran. There's a sense of shame in it.
It is a profound cynicism. It acknowledges that even in death, there is status. Being vaporized by a state-of-the-art intercontinental ballistic missile implies you were a threat worthy of that expenditure. You mattered. Being taken out by a flying lawnmower with wings implies you were just collateral damage in a budget war, an inconvenience.
It really highlights how the actual content of the comedy has shifted so dramatically.
Yeah.
I mean, looking at the history here from the sources, before the full-scale invasion, Ukrainian stand-up was, well, it was normal. It was about relationships, work, everyday stuff.
It was very similar to Western stand-up in themes, but heavily influenced by lingering Soviet tropes. There was a lot of, casual sexism, some racism, gender prejudices, the kind of "my wife is a nag" humor, the classic mother-in-law jokes. It was fairly standard club comedy. Now it's social issues, politics, war, and dead Russians. That is a literal category of humor now.
Svyat Zagaikovich, who founded the underground stand-up club in Kyiv, put it very bluntly. He said, "Now we have a mission. It's to stop people from going crazy." That is a hell of a burden for a guy telling jokes in a basement. The comedian as a frontline mental health worker.
It is. And it's not just the topics. The language itself has changed. This is a fascinating point Zagaikovich made. He noted that before the war, a common trope for comedians was to mock stupid people by having them speak Ukrainian.
Really?
Yeah, it was a lingering colonial trope from the Soviet era, the idea that the uneducated, rural, village idiot speaks Ukrainian, while the sophisticated, educated city person speaks Russian.
And that has inverted now.
Completely inverted. Now, the comedians mock stupid people by having them speak Russian. The linguistic code for idiot has flipped 180 degrees. That is a massive cultural reformatting happening in real time on comedy stages.
That is a huge cultural shift to happen in just a few years. But speaking of shifts in technology and culture, there's this really interesting debate in the source material about artificial intelligence. I have to say, I would not have expected a deep dive into war comedy to touch on AI, but here we are.
It makes a strange kind of sense if you think about what comedy actually is at its core. The source from Ling Room gets into this. The argument is that large language models, AI, they can mimic the structure of a joke, they can do the setup, they can do the punchline.
Sure, why did the chicken cross the road? And AI can generate thousands of variations on that. It can generate irony, technically. It understands the formula.
But the crucial point the source makes is that AI cannot mimic shame. And it cannot mimic the shared physiological reality of being in a room with other fragile human bodies.
The uncanny valley of humor.
Exactly. Stand-up, and especially wartime stand-up, it thrives on the awkward pause. It thrives on the comedian making a mistake and recovering. It thrives on the palpable tension in the room where everyone knows they might die tomorrow. And AI doesn't have a body to blow up.
That is a chilling line. AI doesn't have a body to blow up.
So it can't understand the profound biological relief of not blowing up. There's a specific example given a joke told in a smoking area near the front lines. A soldier telling a joke there to other soldiers has a weight and a meaning that a computer simply cannot replicate. The humor comes from the shared vulnerability, the shared risk. The algorithm generates text. It does not generate stakes.
And that lack of stakes, that need for real human connection, that must explain the explosion in live audiences. You'd think in a war zone people would stay home, hunker down, watch Netflix. Why risk going to a theater? But the stats are just crazy.
They are. The Underground Stand-Up YouTube channel went from 80,000 to 220,000 subscribers, which is impressive, but the offline growth is even more telling.
Yeah, Timoshenko selling out the Palace of Ukraine. That's over 3,000 seats. The sources say that was just unthinkable for a local comedian pre-war.
It was. And the sources emphasize that people crave that physical presence. Sitting in a room with 3,000 other people who are going through the exact same thing as you. It's a validation. It proves that you are still alive. It proves that the missiles and the drones haven't won yet.
It's defiance through attendance. Just showing up is a political act.
Precisely. And that brings us to the people on the stage. Because it's not just civilians joking about the military anymore. It's the military joking about the military. And about civilians.
We absolutely have to talk about Serhiy Lipko. He's such a compelling figure in these reports.
Yes. A fascinating and kind of tragic figure.
So to set the scene, he's a professional comedian, a known name, but he's also serving in the Army. He's now a correspondent for Army TV. And the way the audience treats him is, well, it's strange. It's not how you'd normally treat a comic.
No, it's hero worship mixed with entertainment. The sources describe his performances as historic. People come to see him not just for the jokes, but for the story. The audience loves the narrative arc. He was in the trenches in Bakhmut, which is basically hell on earth. He got a short leave, came to Kiev, told jokes on a stage, and then he went straight back to the trenches.
It's the ultimate authenticity. You can't hegel a guy who was dodging artillery fire yesterday. His jokes have an unassailable authority.
They do, but Lipko himself, in his interviews, he sounds exhausted. In his interview with The Village, he admits he's deeply fatigued by being the military comedian. He says he wants to be a civilian again. He wants to write civilian jokes about, bad dates or problems with his landlord, but he can't.
Because he doesn't know that life anymore.
He says it almost word for word. I can't write civilian jokes because I don't know that life anymore. That is such a tragic admission for a creative person. His entire creative output is now held hostage by his trauma. And he's very, very candid about what he thinks he's doing on stage. He calls it gentle militarization.
That phrase just stuck with me. Gentle militarization. It sounds like propaganda with a punchline.
It is, in a way, and he admits it. He says he uses comedy to feed the military to the public, to make it more palatable. He describes his technique as ice and fire.
Ice and fire, what does that mean?
Sometimes he's harsh. That's the ice. He confronts the audience with the brutal reality of death and mud and fear. But other times, he feeds them gingerbread. That's his word. He says, I feed them from the hand. He tells them, it's okay, come to Kramatorsk, we have filter coffee.
We have filter coffee in Kramatorsk. That is grotesque and also probably incredibly effective, using the promise of a good latte to recruit for the Eastern Front.
The goal is to lower the fear barrier, to encourage mobilization without being aggressive or preachy. He's trying to make the army seem less terrifying to the average guy in Kyiv who is scared of being drafted and sent to the front.
So he's normalizing the abnormal. He's making the unbearable seem bearable.
And he knows it. He questions it himself in the interviews. Is it manipulation? Yes, he says it is. Is it necessary? He seems to think so.
But Lipko also points out something really sad. He says the funniest people who knows, the best comedians, aren't the ones on stage. They aren't the professionals like him.
No. He says the truly funniest people are the anonymous soldiers in the smoking areas. The unknown comedians, as he calls them. Their humor is better, he argues, because it has zero filter and the stakes are absolute.
He talks about his comrade, a man named Volodymyr Kropko.
A genius storyteller, according to Lipko. A man who could spin a yarn about the absurdity of their situation better than any Netflix special. But Kropko was killed. And Lipko makes this really poignant point that you cannot code Kropko's jokes. You can't write them down or reproduce them.
Why not?
Because they weren't structured setups and punchlines. They were pure, organic charisma born of that specific moment in that specific trench with those specific people. It was performance art that only existed for a fleeting moment.
So when he died, the jokes died with him. They're gone forever.
That's the ephemeral tragedy of war. It doesn't just destroy lives and buildings, it destroys the unique culture that it creates. It erases its own storytellers.
And while these soldiers are joking in the trenches, there's this whole other industry of professional comedians touring the West. And reading about that, it feels like a totally different universe.
It is. This is the exporting trauma section of our analysis. You have these big-name comedians like Tymoshenko and Vasil Baidak. Now, under martial law, men of military age generally cannot leave Ukraine. But these guys get special permits from the Ministry of Culture.
They get a pass to leave because they bring back money for the war effort.
Exactly. Millions of hryvnias.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars. They are fundraising. They are basically economic assets for the military disguised as entertainers. But when they go to Europe or the USA, they run into this massive cultural wall.
The disconnect.
A huge, huge disconnect. Tymoshenko talks about performing in the U.S. He does this bit about Joe Biden. He tells the American audience, Biden looks like he can die at any second. He is very similar to Ukrainians.
Oof. That is a sharp elbow right there. I can imagine the awkward silence in the room.
It is, but it's also just fundamentally true from his perspective. But imagine telling a joke about the two walls rule, about hiding in a corridor to a crowd in Paris or London. These people are there for entertainment. They want a pleasant evening out. They don't want to think about the fact that the comedian on stage might not have a home to go back to.
There was that incident in Glasgow that was mentioned in The Guardian.
Yeah.
With the comedian Nastya Zufala.
Right, the fish and chicks incident. A perfect little anecdote that sums up the whole problem.
So she's in Glasgow doing her set, presumably trying to convey the horror and absurdity of the situation through her comedy. And after the show, a shop owner, a fish and chip shop owner, tells her to go home and kill Putin.
Just like that. A direct order. Go home and kill Putin, as if it's an errand she forgot to run. You know, pick up some milk, go to the dry cleaner, and assassinate a nuclear-armed dictator.
It really shows how a certain segment of the West views this war. It's a TV show. It's a piece of content.
It is. They've been watching the war arc for a couple of years now, and they're getting bored. They want the season finale. They want the big Victory Day episode where the bad guy gets his comeuppance. They don't want the messy, grinding, morally complex reality of a stalemate. They don't want the nuance. They just want it to be over so they can stop feeling vaguely guilty about it.
And speaking of Western comedians interacting with this reality, we have to talk about Doug Stanhope.
I was wondering when we would finally get to the howitzer.
This story, I had to read it 3 times in the United 24 Media Report to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. It is just so far beyond the pale. So Doug Stanhope, the American comedian who is known for being, let's say, abrasive and controversial, he visits Ukraine.
A show of solidarity, as many celebrities have done.
A show of solidarity, yes. But he does it in a very Doug Stanhope way. He goes to the front lines in the Donetsk region. He meets with an artillery unit from the Azov Brigade. And he has brought something with him from the States.
His mother's ashes.
His mother's ashes. And he convinces the artillery crew to pack the ashes inside a 152-millimeter high-explosive shell, a shell for a hyacinth howitzer.
And they wrote on the shell, the inscription read, "Mother's Final Ride."
And then they loaded it into the gun and fired it at Russian positions.
And Stanhope's joke is the shell flew through the air, but always wanted to travel.
It is the absolute peak of absurdity. You have a celebrity comedian, a lethal piece of military artillery, human remains, and an active war zone, all colliding in this one bizarre, grotesque stunt for content.
It's the ultimate intersection of celebrity culture and industrial-scale death. It's grotesque, yes, but in the context of this specific war, it almost fits perfectly. It's weirdly consistent with the logic of the AliExpress death and the nuclear holiday. Nothing is sacred anymore. Everything is material. Even your mother's ashes can be weaponized for a punchline.
It sort of brings us back to the venues themselves, the physical spaces where this comedy happens. We talked about the Palace of Ukraine, but the real heart of this scene is the underground stand-up club in Kyiv.
Which is, very appropriately, in a basement.
It is a literal bomb shelter. And they have a rule. If the air raid sirens sound during a show, the show continues. The show does not stop.
And you have to think about the contrast there. The sources point this out. When the sirens go off in Kyiv, the cinemas stop the movie. The shopping malls close. The grocery stores kick you out onto the street. Life halts. But the comedy club, it keeps going.
It's the only place in the city where the war doesn't dictate the schedule. It's a small pocket of defiance.
The British comedian and actor Stephen Fry visited that club. He signed a photo for them to hang on the wall. And he wrote on it, "Stephen Fry died here."
It's funny, but it's also grimly prophetic in a way. It's an acknowledgement that everyone in that room on that night is effectively a ghost in waiting.
And that leads us to the future. What happens when or if the war ends? Timoshenko is very clear on this. He doesn't see a victory day with parades and confetti and joyous celebration.
No, he predicts grief, a massive national wave of grief.
He says, Victory Day won't be a wow moment. It will be a quiet, devastating realization of what and who was lost. The adrenaline will finally wear off, the parasympathetic nervous system will finally take over completely, and the collective depression will hit like a tidal wave.
He also makes his demographic prediction that is it's heartbreaking. He jokes that soon there will only be female comedians left in Ukraine.
Because we men will all have died. It's said as a joke, but if you look at the casualty rates, if you look at the ongoing mobilization, it's a statistical probability masquerading as a punchline.
There was also that quote from a British comic who was performing in Kyiv. The source material calls him a hopeful humorist from Kent.
Ah, yes.
He quipped, "With so much bombing on Ukraine, perhaps no one will notice tiny old me bombing on stage."
A classic stand-up pun on the word bombing, meaning to fail spectacularly.
Right, but recontextualized for a war zone. It implies that his own personal, professional failure bombing on stage is completely irrelevant when the city around him is literally being leveled. It puts the ego of the performer in its proper, insignificant place.
A moment of self-aware humility, which is rare in stand-up comedy.
So after all of this, Where does this leave us? We've covered the physiology of laughter under fire, the economics of death, the weird celebrity cameos, the soldier comedians. What is the real takeaway here?
I think the main takeaway is that humor isn't saving them. That is the myth we in the West really need to dispel. There's this very comforting, very sentimental idea that laughter is the best medicine or that humor will somehow lead to victory.
It's not saving them.
No, it is just making the waiting room for death more bearable. It's palliative care for the soul, not a cure for the war. The evolution we've seen, from raw fear to dark routine to the monetization of trauma to creating content for fundraising for drones, it shows a society that is adapting to a permanent state of horror in the only way it knows how.
So they aren't laughing because they're happy or resilient or hopeful.
Wow.
They're laughing because the only other alternative is to sit in a room and scream.
Exactly. And I think Serhiy Lipko, the soldier comedian, had the most profound and frankly terrifying thought on this. He was talking about the concept of despair.
This was in his interview with The Village.
Yes. He said, we think this is despair now. We think 2024, 2025, 2020 South is the absolute bottom. But he asks us to imagine the future. Imagine sitting in a bunker after a nuclear blast. The world as we knew it is gone. You're fighting another survivor for a can of sardines with a rusty knife.
And he says in that moment, you will look back at this time.
You will look back at the year 2026 and say, remember the good old days. Remember when we just had drone attacks. Remember when we had internet. Remember when you could still get a filter, coffee, and cremators.
That is the ultimate cynical perspective, that things can always get worse. And that what feels like hell today might be looked back on as a golden age tomorrow.
And that this moment, right now, with the sirens and the dead Russians and the jokes about AliExpress deaths, this might be the peak of civilization compared to what comes next.
Maybe we are all just Kyiv nonconformists. We hear the sirens in our own lives, but we don't clap. We just sit there waiting for the show to end, hoping the audience rotates before we do.
We're just hoping that when the end does come, it sounds like a big Hollywood movie and not like a cheap, whining moped.
That's it for this deep dive. Try to have a good week.
If the sirens let you.